Howdy folks, in case you haven't heard, I've been hard at work on a second License Games video that was supposed to release by the end of January, and it's really long and kinda hard to edit, and it's probably not going to be done until the beginning of next month. Sorry, I know that's past when I promised it, and I haven't uploaded since the end of October, and I really want to get to posting more often, so here's something a little bit different than usual that I cooked up in the meantime. Hope you enjoy. Ahem. I do not watch the Twitch streamer Finster. No, seriously, I promise I have a point. But to be fully transparent, no, I do not watch the Twitch streamer Finster. I hadn't even heard of him until a few months ago, and I don't really like watching Twitch streams, so in my day-to-day life, I do not think about him at all. He's literally just some guy with a pretty good sense of fashion, and that's it. I wish him no ill will, and in an ideal world, that would be all I have to say. However, in case you don't know, Finn's entire brand is that he's a cis male who cross-dresses to look like a woman, which is to say, his very existence invites discourse. Discourse about queer baiting, discourse about queer appropriation, discourse about queer discrimination, discourse about if cross-dressers like Finn are doing a queer baiting or an appropriation or discrimination. And honestly, as a trans woman, I think most of it is very silly. I'm not saying there are no genuine criticisms to be had of this Twitch streamer who I, again, do not watch. I'm sure there are plenty. Maybe he's even a little problematic. I do not know, and I do not care. The discussion surrounding him goes much deeper than just one Twitch streamer, and the more I read of it, the more I realize how little these arguments actually stand up to scrutiny and how genuinely toxic the mindsets behind them can be. This is not just a video about the backlash against famous cross-dressing streamer Finster. This is a video about the cross-dresser or trap archetype as a whole, and why the discourse surrounding it can often be misguided or reductive to the overall goals of the trans community. You are not a bad person if you are made uncomfortable by Finn and how he presents his content, but I do hope I can explain through this video that he's not really doing anything wrong by centering his brand on cross-dressing. Let's take this one argument at a time and start with one of the most prevalent, that he's just doing this for the money and it's queer baiting his audience. Okay. There are two facets to this argument, one that I completely understand and one that I fundamentally disagree with. The statement itself is easy to verify. Finn first started cross-dressing in some of his videos because he lost a bet with a friend and had to wear makeup and present as a girl. He did this in some videos where he trolled people on Omegle, which is kinda weird, but it was years ago, so whatever.
The Omegle shock value content of wow, hey, it's a girl, and then you go, wow. Like, that shit, I still do find that a little shitty now, and that's the reason why I've sort of stopped making videos like that.
These took off so massively that he eventually started dressing that way during his Twitch streams as well. At first it was Girl Month, then he got enough positive attention and donations to extend it into the summer, and 2.5 years later, he's still doing it. That's honestly iconic, I literally can't be mad at that. Dressing as a woman has become so synonymous with his brand that logically, if he were to stop now, some of his fans would feel betrayed and his popularity would probably take a hit. So if he wants to keep making this much money from his job, he pretty much has to keep presenting this way regardless if he wants to. In a sense, he is quite literally doing this for the money. And from the outside, I can see how this might sound concerning. Finster is 22 years old, only a month older than me, and his entire gender presentation is in some way tied to his finances. Streaming is a very intensive job, not just because you need to be on for hours at a time for an audience of thousands, but because the brand you are selling is you. When you're an internet personality whose brand is yourself, your own sense of self needs to be presented in a way that is likable and marketable and profitable while still seeming authentic. It's a difficult line to straddle for basically anyone, and I can only imagine it getting even more difficult when your brand is tied to something as personal as your gender presentation. I've seen many express fear that if Finn were to ever stop doing Girl Month, his fanbase would turn on him, that his most vocal and generous viewers would feel betrayed that their parasocial idealized view of him isn't what they expected. I can imagine the same thing happening, but even more intensely if Finn were to come out as a transgender woman. When people feel attached to their idea of your gender, publicly changing that gender could lead to all kinds of horrible reactions. I do think this is a genuine concern, and as an outsider, I hope that Finn has a proper support network in case this type of thing were to happen. To do my own minuscule part, I'm going to speak to any Finster fans watching this video and remind them that Finn is his own human being with his own wants and desires. You can enjoy his content and his presentation, but you do not actually know him, and I do not actually know him, and he doesn't owe us anything. If he's ever going to change how he presents his content or gender, that is not going to be a personal slight against you, and to act as if it is can be harmful to both the creator and yourself. I'm sure most of you watching this know that, but I just wanted to cover my tracks. If this were the only concern people had, I wouldn't even be making this video. Again, I'm an outsider with a tiny audience. Nothing I say here can change people's parasocial bonds or how Finn presents his brand. It's the other side of this argument that doesn't hold nearly as much water to me. That Finn doing this for the money isn't problematic because of how it could affect his own mental health, but problematic for how it's queerbaiting people into thinking he's a marginalized minority for profit. First off, it's impossible for a human being to queerbait someone, just literally impossible based on the definition of the term. I'll go into more detail about this later, but just so you know, it's literally impossible. Second, I actually did skim through Finn's 10 most recent stream highlights just to get a little more context for what his deal was, and in literally 9 of them, he either mentions that he's male or a femboy. He's not baiting anyone, there's a he/him right there in his profile. His pinned tweet is literally his birth certificate showing he's male. People joke about him being an egg, which for those who aren't familiar is slang for a trans person who hasn't realized they're trans yet, but he never stops insinuating that he is a cis male. He occasionally leans into the egg jokes, and I can understand not personally being comfortable with the cis male making jokes about that, but to say that he's queerbaiting his audience is an actual lie. He makes it clear at all steps of the process that he's a cis man who dresses like a woman. Even in this video, which based on the thumbnail you'd think is him coming out or something, he outright states that he took the test because people didn't believe that he was actually a cis male.
For some reason, you guys have stopped believing me when I say I'm a manly man. And during a 24-hour stream that you guys paid me to do, I decided to take a bit of a test.
I don't get it. He can't win. If he doesn't insinuate his gender, he's queerbaiting. If he does insinuate his gender, he's making light of misgendering, apparently. He's right in this reply. I agree with him. How is this his fault? Third, and this might be a bit of a hot take, but even if he was doing this 100% for the profit, and if the money stopped pouring in, he'd immediately stop, that would not matter. At all. Yeah, it genuinely does not matter if Finn exclusively cross-dresses to make money, because there is no right or wrong reason to present your gender in any particular way. To say that there is a wrong reason is to go against the point of gender nonconformity altogether, which is to escape the oppressive confines of the rigid or westernized idea of the gender binary, not to create a new set of roles that you have to follow or else you're a problematic. You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you want to present in the first place. This is a mindset that you see a lot in discussions of bodily autonomy, whether it pertains to gender or disability or reproductive rights. People are a bit obsessed with the concept of someone using systems meant for transgender or disabled people for non-gender or disability-related purposes, and by people, I mostly mean the systems themselves. For example, the gender transition process in the United Kingdom is notoriously difficult. Watch this devastating philosophy tube video if you want to know the full extent of how. It's real bad. TLDR, trans people must wait on an extremely long waitlist for a chance at a lengthy and invasive interview with a psychologist just to get a gender dysphoria diagnosis before they can even see a doctor. This is supposedly to deter people from transitioning for no reason, because weeding out the fakers or the trenders or the not actually transes is way more important than actually helping the people who need it. It's totally not to deter people from transitioning altogether. What? Unless, of course, they want to make it hard because a lot of people in positions of power think trans people should not exist and this is their means of enforcing that. They can't do the comparatively simple informed consent model because that's too easy. If the doctors inform and the patients consent, a faker might make it through. An imposter, if you will. And Among Us is a 2018 online multiplayer social deduction game developed and published by American game studio Innersloth, if you'll please. Seriously though, who cares if so-called fakers make it through? What is there to gain? Men sneaking into women's restrooms to assault women? You can already do that without transitioning. The women's rooms, they're not locked. It's not like you need to scan your ID to get in. You can just go in there. What do you want, the element of surprise? Why base an entire healthcare system on such inane contingencies? If there are any institutional limits on who can and cannot qualify as transgender or disabled, it is going to inevitably hurt those that don't fit into the mold. These limits aren't imposed by nature, they're imposed by people, and people are often biased. Yes, Finn is not trans, trans and has gone on the record countless times saying that he's a cis male with no plans of medically or socially transitioning. But let's imagine a hypothetical. What if tomorrow Finn did come out as a transgender woman? She reveals that, having a job as excruciatingly public as being a Twitch streamer, she chose to experiment with her gender presentation by setting up the whole Girl Month thing. Then, it exploding the way it did gave her the time, resources, and platform that she needed to see what identity made her feel the most happy. The past insistences that she was just a cis male were simply to protect herself, and the egg jokes were her genuinely toying with her sexuality. She will now be changing her name and medically transitioning while still streaming on Twitch and being cheeky about her gender on Twitter. If this were to happen, wouldn't that make a lot of the arguments against Finn feel a lot grosser in retrospect? That people saw a public figure presenting in a gender nonconforming way and assumed that it exclusively had to be a money thing where she was selfishly trying to get donations from horny fetishists, that if there was no money in this, she never would have started dressing like a girl, that the only reason she continues to dress like a girl is because of the continued income. She's not a real woman, this is a mockery of womanhood. She's taking away resources and attention from actual women and actual queer people, right? Huh, aren't those just like every transphobic talking point that we've been seeing for the past few years? Obviously, if you're a transphobe, you won't care, but most in the woke community TM would hopefully acknowledge that these comments are gross and invasive, and emblematic of the very gatekeeping that the establishment uses to oppress trans people. Finn may not be a trans person as far as we know, but if a comment were to suddenly become bigoted if the person it's talking about were to adopt a marginalized label, it's probably not an appropriate comment in the first place. Invasive and presumptuous comments about the morality of a public figure's gender presentation don't suddenly become bad once said public figure is in a marginalized group. They're already bad whether the person is cis, queer, or closeted. This isn't me trying to play both sides and say that trans people can't ever be mean to cis people even though cis people are often mean to trans people. This is me saying that anti-trans talking points don't suddenly become acceptable just because they're said against a cis person. Yes, Finn may have started doing this because of a bet, for money, but he's the one who agreed to the prank. It's not like he had to do it or he'd go to jail. He chose to do it. And yeah, Finn's brand probably would be affected if he were to stop dressing like a woman, but he still could if he really wanted to. My channel would probably reach a wider audience if I presented as a cis male by virtue of the fact that transphobes might unknowingly subscribe to me without knowing that I'm a huge feminine slut on the inside. And if I started this channel earlier in my life before I realized I was trans, I would have had to eventually come out once I realized and started medically transitioning. Would that have been a bad business move? Technically, yeah. Would I have done it anyway? Yes. Obviously, that's just me, and I should reiterate for this entire video that I don't represent every trans woman. I don't represent Finn either. I don't know what's going on inside of his brain. However, if dressing like a woman was not something that brought him at least a little bit of joy, I don't think he'd have kept doing this for 2 years straight with no plans of stopping, all while excitedly trying on new outfits and making cheeky jokes about his looks on Twitter. Saying that he'd drop it if there was no money in it kind of feels like it's missing the point because he could also drop it now and doesn't. Also, I would say that shaming him for doing this for money has like a vaguely anti-sex work sentiment attached to it. Indeed, he is frequented by quite a few How You Say Simps who have donated a lot, and I mean a lot of money, and don't exactly hide that they're into his whole deal, but why is that a problem? Some people's entire jobs are to be attractive to How You Say Simps because they will like pay to have sex with them or see nudes of those people. Neither are bad. People are allowed to do that. And if your response to this is mentioning how the pressures of presenting your gender in a certain way are concerning, then you are correct. We are now on the same page. The only truly concerning aspect of him dressing like a woman because of money is that people's parasocial attachment and financial investment to his gender might cause a detachment from his own sense of self, making him, in a way, also a victim of outward expectations about his gender. He's not our enemy here. Society is. Okay, we've been on these points for a while, so let's wrap things up. In conclusion, you're not a bad person if you've had these knee-jerk reactions before. I just hope you can understand that anti-trans or anti-sex or anti-bodily autonomy rhetoric doesn't suddenly become okay if it's said against a cishet white person. It's still kind of bad and harmful rhetoric, in my opinion. Luckily, the other points I want to talk about won't take quite as long to debunk as this one, so let's go ahead and move on to the next argument. That what Finn is doing, i.e. playing into stereotypes about femboys and traps that are often used to justify violence against trans women, is offensive to or even appropriative of the LGBT+ community. And as sympathetic as I am to this argument, this is another case where I fundamentally disagree. So here's another hot take. I personally don't think it's possible for an individual to appropriate queerness. Like, by its very nature, the term appropriate doesn't apply to queerness in the same way it might to race or culture. When a person of a dominant racial group, i.e. white Americans, appropriate elements of a marginalized racial group, i.e. Native Americans, they are profiting off of or benefiting from the aesthetics of a culture by essentially using it as a costume. They are not inheriting the centuries of oppression and eugenics that countless native tribes were subjected to, but they are inheriting the whitewashed marketable aesthetic of said culture to make a profit. The moment it stops being profitable or starts causing issues, they can just take off the costume, unlike actual indigenous people who cannot just take off their race and all the societal prejudices that come with it. That's why Gwen Stefani dancing in front of that TP while wearing a headdress was considered kinda gauche. However, when a heterosexual or cisgender person appropriates elements of queer culture, they do inherit the oppression that queer people go through. A cis man wearing a dress in public is still transgressing the societal norm that only the gals should wear the dresses. Even if the person labels themselves as cis and straight, they are going to be faced with a lot of the same obstacles that genuine trans women are. They'll be forced to stick to male dress codes at their job. They'll be given weird looks or threats of violence for going against people's ignorant views of gender. And in some countries, they might outright be punished. To be queer is to break against societal norms of gender and sexuality, and even if someone technically considers themselves cis, they can still be hurt by those very same societal norms. To put this into perspective, let's imagine another hypothetical. What if I was wrong? It turns out appropriating queer culture was objectively morally incorrect, so much so that it was made illegal. If you are not openly LGBTQIA+, you are not allowed to do the limp wrist gesture, or read Chainsaw Man, or buy a blahage. If you are caught doing any of these, you will go to jail for 1,000 years. Hooray! This objectively problematic action now has a built-in societal punishment. If a man is caught wearing a drag outfit but doesn't identify as gay or trans, they are now going to jail. But oh no, that person wasn't straight or cis, they were trans. But they lived in a community where trans people were not accepted and coming out would have been social suicide. Now they are forced to either come out against their will or go to jail. In a broader sense, all LGBTQIA+ individuals are either forced out of the closet if they want to continue openly expressing themselves, or deeper into the closet where they must pretend not to be themselves. It sounds like trying to restrict certain behaviors to certain groups is actually harmful to those groups. That sounds familiar. Maybe this isn't something we should police. Maybe we shouldn't force celebrities out of the closet for appropriating queer culture when maybe they were just not ready to come out. Just look at how 18-year-old actor Kit Connor was forced to come out when people accused him of queerbaiting by playing a bisexual character in a show than being seen with a woman IRL. Just look at how cis men are shamed for not conforming to gender roles despite that being the exact mindset homophobic or transphobic people use. Who cares if Harry Styles isn't gay? How is him dressing effeminately tangibly hurting literally anyone? I would love an exclamation in the comments. 500-word minimum, double-spaced, MLA citations, go. So no, Finn is not appropriating queer culture because that is just not possible by the very nature of queer culture. He's expressing his gender in a way that works for him, like anyone should be able to, like the literal end goal of the LGBT+ movement. Even if he was truly being a horrible person who, like, ate babies or something, the fact that he cross-dresses should not even be a footnote. I don't think a lot of the people making this critique are intentionally trying to spread malice, though. There is something to be said about how people who aren't LGBT get celebrated for their gender nonconformity, while people who are get punished for it. In some cases, people being lauded for it when presenting as cis, then getting shunned for it the moment they come out as queer. Just look at how much of James Stephanie Sterling's audience disappeared after they came out. It sucks. Seeing a cis male streamer get this much success when trans or non-binary streamers have lost large chunks of their audience upon coming out does genuinely sting. And it is a decent jumping off point for discussions of how LGBT+ creators are treated. On that note, though, I do think people really overestimate how widely accepted cross-dressers or femboys or drag queens actually are. Are gamer bros more willing to accept femboy characters than trans characters? Absolutely. Just look at the Bridget situation in Guilty Gear Strive. The 20 years where she was a femboy character, celebrated. The moment she comes out as trans, evil. Likewise, are cis male drag queens able to take off their costume at the end of a performance and go home completely unaffected by transphobia now? Sure, technically, but let's not be naive. It is not a coincidence that a massive amount of the anti-LGBT legislation passing around the United States is focused on banning drag events. These bills, under the guise of protecting our children from deviant sexual acts, essentially aim to recriminalize wearing clothes that do not conform to your legal assigned gender. Lawmakers do not care that drag queens are technically cis and not transgender. To the evangelical right, it's all the same. It's all equally bad and should not exist. If dressing outside your legal gender was banned in the United Kingdom, would Finn be able to take off his costume and dress like a mannequin? Yes, and that's still bad. That is still really bad. He may not technically be forced into a closet where it'd be miserable hiding his own identity, but he'd still be a human who just lost the right to express himself in a way that works for him. That's still a human rights violation. The societal effects of transphobia hurt everyone. If you don't exactly fit into the traditional westernized roles of male or female, you're screwed over. If you do fit into those roles, you're probably still screwed over. If you're not in the evangelical right, you're going to be screwed over, so maybe they should be our enemy. That brings me to the other side of this argument, and my last overall point: is Finster's perpetration of femboy stereotypes harmful to the LGBT+ community? Is he part of the cis establishment that actively hurts trans people everywhere? And you know, I do think there is some nuance to this question. It's very possible for a queer person or a gender non-conforming person or someone of a particular race to believe in or act in ways that go against their own social group or another equally oppressed group. There are gay Republicans, there are trans Republicans, there are gay or trans Republican politicians who actively work with powerful people who could erase gay or trans people from existence if given the opportunity. There are gay cops whose job would be to enforce any potential sodomy or dress code laws that get passed in their area, all while working for an institution that is blatantly hostile to black people and especially black trans people. Just because you are LGBTQIA+, it doesn't mean you'll automatically be welcomed into the community, particularly if you act in ways that outright hurt the community. In the case of Finster, I do understand the argument that he plays into a stereotype, specifically the stereotype of a man who is otherwise indistinguishable from a woman, but surprise, has a wiener. This is an idea that has genuinely hurt trans women in the past, and Finn is not a trans woman. I do get it. I mean, I'm not even usually a fan of this archetype as it's often used in fiction. I didn't care for Florian in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 despite loving that game. I'm probably never going to play Catherine Full Body because the game's general premise and how it was marketed did make me feel more than a little uncomfortable. I'm not going to say these things are objectively transphobic and you're transphobic if you like them just because I, a trans woman, was made uncomfortable by them, but I'm also not going to say that any person who has engaged with these works and does find them problematic is invalid either. I'm just saying that these are characters. They're not real beings with thoughts and agency. They're creations made by people with worldviews and agendas and intentions that we may or may not be aware of. It's perfectly fine to resonate with these stories regardless of their context. Maybe the people who created these characters genuinely want to tell a story using this trope, or maybe they wanted to include a fetishistic and played out stereotype because they knew it would get people to buy their merchandise. It depends on the character or game or creator, but the whole point of literary analysis and media criticism is to grapple with these types of questions. The thing is, Finster, or Jude, yeah, his real name is Jude, I didn't even realize that until halfway through editing, that should tell you how little I engage with this guy's content. Jude is not a character, he's a person. I understand the impulse to view him how I might view a character because Twitch streams are seen as content and his content is part of an overall brand, but the brand is still him, a person, a real guy, and real people are allowed to present in ways that might align with gendered stereotypes or make others uncomfortable. Obviously, that doesn't apply if you're outright harming others, but people like Jude aren't harming anyone in particular. The stigma that comes from the trap stereotype doesn't exist because of any specific group or person. It exists because of decades and decades of institutional misogyny, racism, and transphobia. Our society believes that your birth sex defines your identity for the rest of your life, that homosexuality is one of the the worst, most emasculating things that a man can partake in. The very concept of a trans woman having sex with a cis man goes against those two puritanical values, because it involves a man purposefully shedding his masculinity in favor of femininity, then having sex with another man to in turn remove his masculinity. It goes against everything the evangelical right believes, and those in this status quo fear nothing more than to be removed from that safety net against their will. Thus, the idea that trans women aren't just normal-ass people who might just want to have sex from time to time, but temptresses who deceive men into becoming gay was born. Not because trans people were actually pressuring cis men into sex en masse, but because cis men were terrified of the concept of trans women en masse. Again, Finn may not technically be trans, but the way he dresses is still seen as transgressive, which isn't perpetrating the stereotype because it's not the reason the stereotype exists. No individual person is ever the reason that a stereotype exists. Stereotypes exist because they're easy generalizations that can excuse prejudice and violence. That Asian people are naturally smart, so individual Asian contributions are less special. That black people are naturally thugs, so police violence against them is justified. Or that trans people are naturally deceptive, so domestic violence against them is also justified. Does that mean that Asian people who are smart, or black people with criminal records, or anyone with genitals that don't match their appearance are bad for perpetrating their stereotypes? No. Saying so is meeting our oppressors at their own level, and we have got to stop letting them set the terms of what actions are and aren't acceptable for a minority group to do. It doesn't suddenly become okay if the person transgressing societal norms in a stereotypical way calls themselves cis. They are still transgressing a societal norm. They are still not the enemy here, and they never will be. I'm sorry for letting my stereotypical angry trans woman pop out. I guess it's my fault next time there's a bathroom ban. We're pooping back home this week, ladies. I improvised that part, and I'm keeping it in. To wrap things up, I want to reiterate that I truly do sympathize with some of these arguments. I do not want to be one of those people that says, oh, you only dislike Finn because you're jealous that he can pass better than you, because that's also such a shitty and transphobic thing to say. Jesus Christ. I didn't make this video because I'm a stan who wants to defend my Twitch streamer bias. I made it because this discourse about femboys is bringing about some genuinely regressive talking points that I couldn't just sit and watch fly. Even if Finster is revealed to be the #1 biggest problematic in the whole wide world tomorrow, I would still stand by everything I said here today. Anti-trans rhetoric doesn't suddenly become okay if it's said against a cis person, and trying to cancel people for appropriating queer culture or for perpetrating queer stereotypes only serves to hurt those who need the help just as much as us. Overall, I just don't think it's productive or helpful to try and build a divide between trans people and gender nonconforming cis people when our struggles have so much overlap and neither party's is caused by the other. What's the benefit to further divide a movement that is already being attacked from all sides? To discourage cis people from experimenting with their gender identity lest they be seen as harmful appropriators? To claim that someone who just donated $25,000 of his own income to help trans people in the United Kingdom with $25,000 more matched by one of his biggest simps is hurting the trans community actually? Yeah, I kinda hid the lead there, and I know, philanthropy doesn't always align with morals, but come on. If after all of this, you seriously think that the femboys are the problem, then I don't know what to tell you. Go outside, touch a grass, pat a moose, slap the bongo drum, throw a brick at a I'd like to give a special thanks to my patrons at the producer tier and above, those being Ace L, Chloe BC, Danny, Viewsfall, Joy Content, Oliver Kokorin, Oski, Simon Welsh, and Vincent Coates. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all later.